It's a money fight, I get you, and you want to make money. But at some point in time, if you keep telling us that you're taking boxing seriously and you want to be recognized as a big-time boxer / fighter, you're going to have to fight somebody closer to your age, who is a contender at the very least.
Jake Paul fight announcement, another circus act, another clown show. A fight between Jake Paul and Gervonta Tank Davis has been announced as an exhibition fight.
The fight that I couldn't believe, that was too insane and honestly just baffling to think would be a real fight in 2025, reminds you that combat sports are the craziest sports on the planet.
Stephen A. Smith didn't mince words about the Jake Paul versus Gervonta Davis fight, labeling it a circus. While he acknowledged Jake Paul's knack for self-promotion and creating major spectacles, he stressed that boxing deserves far more respect. Smith argued Jake should face opponents that make real sense instead of chasing hype and shock value. To him, this matchup puts entertainment above true competition.
Because I think that what Jake tries to do for the sport of boxing, I think people don't realize the importance of him being able to promote for himself and not being reliant on the promoters who I believe has held the sport hostage. The only critique I've ever given Jake, I just want Jake to fight boxers. Like Nate Diaz, we know his reputation. We know the man can fight. We know in the octagon he could be something special. But we know you breathe on him, he starts bleeding.
It's a fair critique. And you know what? He should fight boxers. But then again, should he? Because I'll tell you why. If you're a human who can rake in $6 to $10 million fighting people that you know you're going to beat, and you want to build a resume and a record that's impressive with a good highlight reel, you got to be strategic about this shit. Jake's 25, 26. He's got so much time.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, I get where you coming from. All I'm saying is, we don't know your skill set because you haven't been in there with anybody really skilled.
Many believe Jake Paul's latest fight is yet another circus act in his career. Critics argue that most of his bouts lack genuine logic or competitive balance, serving more for attention than true sport. Instead of choosing opponents that align in style or weight, Jake continues pursuing unusual matchups. For many experts, this pattern turns his fights into entertaining spectacles rather than serious boxing contests.
Jake Paul won the fight, but yeah, that was that. This time, Jake Paul is to take on Tank Davis. Tank Davis, he was recently in the news for being arrested for a domestic violence incident involving one of his kids' mother. He was alleged to have slapped her about the place. The charges were later dropped, to be fair to him. But yeah, that was when he was last in the news. What is interesting is just a couple of months ago, Tank Davis was saying openly that he'd lost his passion for boxing and that he wanted time away from the sport. There was speculation that he might even retire as he was experiencing extreme mental fatigue from boxing, depression, and there were mental health concerns over him. However, I guess the opportunity to earn a truck full of money, fighting a completely worthless exhibition fight against Jake Paul, was enough to make him change his mind about boxing. Funny that, isn't it? But you know what? I'm not even going to waste your time or mine critiquing this utter nonsense. Suffice to say that this so-called fight we're talking about is an exhibition, and it pits Jake Paul, who is a cruiserweight, by the way, weighs in excess of 200 pounds, and Tank Davis, who is, he was the WBA lightweight champion, who weighs in at about 135 pounds when he fights. So that's a disparity of some 65 pounds. In old money, that's about 4.5 stone. There's also a significant difference in height. Jake Paul is roughly, 6'1", 2. Gervonta Davis is 5'5" at best. So, there's a height.
Ring Magazine stunned the boxing world by announcing that Jake Paul will fight Gervonta Tank Davis on November 14th at State Farm Arena in Atlanta. The exhibition, confirmed to Mike Carpenter, will stream live on Netflix. A planned Paul vs. Anthony Joshua bout collapsed over network issues. Paul last competed at 200 pounds, while Davis reigns at 135, making this clash a major talking point around size, spectacle, and boxing's unpredictability. Paul has been aggressively driving his own agenda, investing money and building hype to chase bold goals. Though many criticize his unorthodox approach, others credit him for using his financial power to spotlight the sport and bring in new fans. A matchup once deemed impossible now shows just how far Paul is willing to go.
It makes sense, and we've seen that Jake will kind of bounce in between doing these entertainment fights and then, trying to push toward his goal of ingraining himself in the sport of boxing, and kind of does both of them. So it's kind of a weird place to be, because he wants the respect of the boxing fans and the boxing hierarchy and hardcore boxing people, but at the same time, he'll gain some of that and then lose some of it. It's like a seesaw of his fights. Like one fight, and be like, okay, that's a real fight, or that's a real fight. And he'll go and he'll win the fight. Julio Cesar Chavez, real fighter, maybe past his prime, whatever, but Jake goes and wins that fight pretty easily, and then gets a lot of respect, gets a lot of the boxing hardcore love. And you have these talks about him fighting Anthony Joshua, and that was going to get even more respect. More people were like, that's fucking crazy. What are you doing? Myself included. That seemed like a massive risk, but a lot of people were like, okay, fair play. Anthony Joshua, that's a real heavyweight. Jake wants to fight him. He's a psycho, but fair play. And then you announce this one, and it's like, well, that's the same thing people have been saying about Jake for years, so it's a weird spot to be in for him for sure. But I talked about this not being the first choice, and I don't think it was, because Coppinger reports next that talks for Jake Paul to face Anthony Joshua collapsed over network issues. Now, we had all heard the talks, and they were pretty public, from Eddie Hearn, from Jake. Nakisa Badarian, Jake's manager, was over in the UK on, I think, Sky Sports, talking about the fight and saying how it was a real possibility and they were really starting to work on it. And now Mike Coppinger says that the talks for Jake and Joshua fell apart over broadcasting issues.
Jake Paul later confirmed the fight on Instagram, writing, "Size versus speed, power versus precision. One will rise and one will fall from Atlanta. Live globally only on Netflix Friday, November 14th. His post ignited even more buzz, turning the exhibition into a global talking point. Boxing legend Teddy Atlas weighed in on Paul's rise, pointing to the sacrifices behind his success. Atlas stressed that, despite the critics, Paul deserves credit for securing the fights he wants, something that takes persistence, investment, and a willingness to gamble stability for the spotlight. Paul has carved out a lane in boxing few thought possible for a YouTuber-turned-fighter." Atlas also highlighted that Paul has truly sharpened his craft, spending years with elite coaches, sparring seasoned pros, and learning to handle himself in the ring. While purists may scoff, Atlas argues much of the criticism ignores the effort and growth Paul has shown. Many dismiss him for his background, but his journey proves just how much he has poured into reaching this level.
They gave too much credit to Paul. Why? He's done a hell of a job to put himself in this position. He sold himself. He sold his dream. He took his dream. He took his idea. And he put it out there, and he made it happen. Give him credit for that. And he made it happen. And he took risk along the way. Yeah, he picked his spots. He's in the driver's seat. He gets to pick his spots. He's the one bringing the money. He's the one promoting. Yeah, he's the name. He made himself that, coming from where he came from, with all his followers and the whole thing, and just the uniqueness of what he was doing. But he has learned along the way. He's not a top guy yet. No, I don't know that he ever will be. He didn't have that amateur background and the things that you usually need to be a top guy. But he has improved. He is a work in progress. He is a guy that you got to give him credit that he's respected the sport. He went out there, he's worked hard at it, and he's gotten himself into this position. Having said all of that, this might be a step too far. Now, when I say it, I try to be responsible. I've been in this game 50 years, so I know where not to step, where you could twist an ankle, or worse, you could break a leg or fall down. When I say that with the understanding, too, that Joshua's coming off.
The team at Talk Sports had a strong reaction to the Jake Paul vs. Gervonta Davis announcement, calling it a heavily unbalanced matchup. Their main concern is the drastic weight difference. Davis, a natural 135 pounds lightweight known for his knockout power, versus Paul, who fights around 195 pounds. This raises questions about how the fight can be seen as fair or meaningful with such a gap in size. Their response mirrors a frequent criticism of Paul's opponent choices, as many feel he targets fighters who are smaller, past their prime, or outside of traditional boxing. In this case, while Davis may be in his prime, he is clearly undersized against Jake.
And that's probably where the problem was. So I think that fight is sort of like dead and buried in the water. And we get Gervonta Davis, man, like you guys said it. He's a 135-pound world champion, lightweight world champion. The guy's my height. He's 5'5". And Jake Paul is a cruiserweight. You know, he walks around at sort of like 15 stone. So, and it's an exhibition. So look, if you buy into that, then yeah, fine. But it's not one for me.
Spence, let me ask you this: if you were European champion, right?
Yes.
Before you had to retire, Sally, you were European champion. If you were, how tall are you? What are you at? 4'8", 4'9"?
5'5".
5'5". Okay. If you were in your pomp at European champion and you were 5'5" and you were fighting Jake Paul, would you fancy your chances?
Absolutely. I think, yeah, definitely. I think I fancy my chances. I think Gervonta Davis actually beats him as well. He's one of the pound-for-pound best fighters in the world at lightweight. But it's a bit of a weird one, isn't it? It's like you got a guy of 5'5" boxing a guy of 6 foot plus. Cruiserweight. Yeah, it's just all a little bit odd. I feel if they're going to do an exhibition, perhaps Jake should have picked someone more his size. Look, his last fight against Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. Was at cruiserweight. Chavez Jr. was a former world champion at middleweight himself, and that sort of made sense. And it was a good win for Jake Paul. You know, he come out there and he beats an ex-world champion. He gets a little bit of credibility, and you go, right, now you're heading in the right direction.
Boxing analysts also weighed in, noting that the fight offers little upside for Gervonta Davis. Despite being the smaller man, Davis carries an undefeated record and a reputation for knockout power. But stepping in against someone so much bigger brings real risk. A loss would likely be dismissed as him being outsized, while even a win could be downplayed by those who argue Jake Paul was never an elite boxer, diluting the value of the victory.
For Gervonta as much as it is for Jake. Jake, it's like, okay, you're fighting a former world lightweight champion. You're bigger, so you have some advantages, even if you're, at a severe skill disadvantage. You're not supposed to expect to do anything, but if you do, it's even, it's bananas for you. It's great. Gervonta, I don't know. What if Jake hits him? Jake's a big guy. I don't know if Gervonta stood next to Jake. Jake's a big guy.
Yeah, he's a big dude.
And Gervonta is small even by lightweight standards.
Right.
So it is a little bit of a David and Goliath fight. It's just, the David character in Gervonta is much, much more skilled. But I guess that's the thought process. As far as what it does for boxing, well, absolutely nothing. But then again, what have Gervonta Davis and Jake Paul really done for boxing in the ring aspect? Because Jake,
Very good promoter.
I am a believer in Jake as a promoter, and I think that he has a future as a promoter, and I think he's done very well as a promoter, and I think his company has done some very good things for the sport, and for young fighters, and for brewing talent and making good fights on that basis. But as far as from fighters' perspective, what do they do for boxing from a fighter's perspective? I don't think Gervonta Davis has ever done anything for boxing, honestly. Like I feel like TV has just in this generation, they just create stars, and then they just tell you, okay, we're gonna make this guy the star. It's like they're pre-created, and then they just tell you.
Critics argue that Jake Paul's influence in boxing comes more from his financial power than his skill or rankings. Analysts point out that his money and promotional reach give him the freedom to arrange matchups that often defy the sport's logic. His ability to land fights with Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. and now Gervonta Davis highlights the level of control he wields. For traditional fans, these bouts feel more like entertainment spectacles than genuine competition. Many believe this undermines the sport's integrity, as standard matchmaking based on weight and rankings is bypassed entirely.
Another Jake Paul fight, another embarrassing night for boxing. Said this a few times now, and I'm really getting sick of it. 10 rounds of tediousness, whereby Jake Paul was just, I say throwing punches, a lot of them didn't have any zip on them against an opponent that was just compliant. He holds boxing in contempt. He's basically pimping the sport. That's what Jake Paul is doing. And I find it unacceptable, I really do. The whole Jake Paul brand is actually bad for boxing. Taking advantage of the sport, pimping the sport, fighting washed up MMA fighters, former fighters, and now we're hearing that he's about to enter the WBA rankings and could be in line for a world title shot. Absolute farce. He couldn't get away with it in any other sport, and that's what makes...
Former world champion Carl Froch didn't hold back, calling the matchup an absolute joke. He revealed that a Jake Paul vs. Anthony Joshua fight was nearly finalized, reportedly 99% complete. Instead of stepping in with a heavyweight like Joshua, Paul chose Gervonta Davis, a fighter nearly half his size. Froch called the move baffling and pointed to it as proof that Paul values shock factor over real competition. His remarks echoed the view of many boxing insiders who believe Paul selects opponents to maximize publicity while minimizing risk. A fight with Joshua would have been a true test, but against Davis, Froch sees it as more of a sideshow.
So Jake Paul was supposed to be fighting AJ. Eddie Hearn announced 99% done, which we've just spoke about. What next for AJ? Potentially Jake Paul. But it now looks like that Jake Paul is fighting one of Anthony Joshua's legs. He's fighting Gervonta Davis, somebody who's a quarter of his size. I don't even know what's going on. Has Eddie Hearn been played? Let me know what you think. But the AJ fight with Jake Paul's finished. Gervonta Davis, fake Paul, November. I don't know what's going on in the world of boxing. This is an absolute joke. What next for AJ? We'll get into this, and there's so many questions I want to get into.
Paulie Malignaggi, former two-division world champion and boxing analyst, admitted he never saw this matchup coming. He said the announcement caught everyone off guard and shocked the boxing world. While Paul has drawn attention with unusual opponents in the past, pairing him with a lightweight like Davis still surprised Malignaggi. He described it as an unpredictable move that shows just how far Paul is willing to push the boundaries of matchmaking.
Even prior to the Lamont Roach fight, I thought it was so utterly ridiculous, especially that you've essentially manufactured Gervonta into a star without really having him fight any major threats in his career, you know? I know the groupies, they're gonna say somebody like saying, well, if Leo Santa Cruz is the biggest name on your resume, you got a problem. Like Santa Cruz was probably dying shot by the time he fought Gervonta Davis. Santa Cruz, who 90% of his own resume was against guys you never heard of. And again, it was a one directional fighter who started at bantamweight and they fought at 130. That's your best win. Pedraza's a solid win, I thought, even though it was a weight drain Pedraza, and Pedraza was so weight drained that he'd actually already lost to Edna Cherry and should have already not been champion by the time Gervonta fought him, but they robbed Edna Cherry in that IBF title defense of Jose Pedraza, so that Pedraza remained champion. I remember because I worked that show and commentated that fight. So it's a sneaky good win, but it's sort of below the radar, not that good of a win. He had a weight drain Pedraza, a Pedraza who went up to lightweight and actually fought better once he didn't have to weight drain himself, and who had been struggling already at 130 prior to being knocked out by Davis. Like I said, he'd already lost to Cherry and was lucky to keep the title in the Cherry fight at 130. So Cherry, mind you, a guy that I beat way back in the day. I don't know. It's I beat him easily, like 9 out of 10 rounds, 10 out of 10 rounds, something like that. I don't know. I really don't know what to make of this, man. I sure as hell love to hear the comments. It's gonna generate curiosity for sure. Jake Paul is huge. I mean, this is like, he's going to be almost a foot bigger than Gervonta Davis. This is an exhibition, so there's not going to be an official winner unless there's a stoppage. So things like glove size, ring size still has to be dictated and figured out. I don't know. I don't know what you do with this. I don't know what boxing's coming to. This is what happens when you manufacture a star instead of letting stars organically create themselves.
Daniel Cormier, UFC legend and analyst, shared a different perspective, noting that Jake Paul's fight with Mike Tyson on Netflix broke the internet and set a new bar for crossover events. With the Davis fight also heading to Netflix, Cormier believes Paul is proving he can stage spectacles that attract mainstream attention far beyond boxing's usual audience. He sees Paul as an important figure, even if many fans won't admit it. Cormier also argues that Paul is better than people think, pointing out his serious training, willingness to take risks, and constant push to raise the stakes. While critics label him just a social media star, Cormier believes Jake's influence and improved skills deserve credit. Agree or not, Paul has undeniably shifted the boxing conversation, and that in itself is a form of success.
Woodley twice. Big numbers. Jake Paul fought against Tommy Fury. Big numbers. Jake Paul, who I believe, and I have told you guys this time and time again, he's much better than people give him credit for. One, Jake Paul is not an amateur fighter, like some try to say. Jake Paul has money, so Jake Paul is getting trained by the best boxing coaches that money can buy. He's full-time boxing. There are a lot of people that say he may do some other stuff. I don't know who he was gonna fight that was saying that he was juiced up and he was ignoring him. Or was it Logan Paul? One of them. But at the end of the day, this kid's training to be the best fighter in the world, or the best as he can be, and he understands what losing would do to the perception of who he is in fighting. We were yelling so much about him fighting someone. Fight somebody your size. Fight somebody, a real boxer. Stop fighting MMA guys. There were so many things that people were mad about in regards to his level of competition and the people he was competing against. Well, today we learned that Jake Paul has his next opponent. His next opponent is by far the most credentialed guy actively. Many don't want to jump down.
That's all for today's video. Stay tuned for more updates.